So we work to promote the right of access to information. That means translating that fundamental right into access to information laws and making them work in practice, primarily in the European region, but also working on promoting that right globally. Well, access to information is both old and it's new. It's true that the first law was 1766, but I'm here this week also celebrating the first anniversary of the entry into force of the Argentine access to information law. And basically we've seen a kind of exponential growth in the last 2 decades of access to information, freedom of information laws. So I would say that yes, the basic ideas of government openness are old, but as with open data, putting them into practice is something that's relatively new, and it's something that's happening now. And that perhaps explains why we're still talking about the many challenges of doing that and doing that well. I think the increasing acceptance on the part of governments, at least some people within governments, many governments around the world, that government transparency, government openness is a good thing. Recognizing not only the value of releasing data, but also recognizing that increasing participation through better information for the citizenry can actually improve the quality of government processes and government decision making. And that's why, in addition to the right to information movement and the open data movement, we've seen in less than 10 years, really, we've seen the growth of the open government movement and the open government partnership, which is very much fueled by the recognition that it is something that's of benefit to governments as well. So it's no longer solely civil society pushing and demanding this, but it's also something that governments are stepping up and offering, and we're able to have more constructive dialogues about how to do it and how to do it well. Okay, so we've got various things in there. First of all, information being leaked. Information was always leaked. Before we had access to information laws, before we had open data, with a spin put on it, or the selective leaking of information in order to, for political ends. That hasn't changed entirely. Maybe the volumes of data that can be leaked are different, but essentially that mechanism hasn't changed. Sometimes when we see leaked information, I take it as an indicator of how access to information laws are not working. If journalists are having to rely on leaked information to write their stories, then it shows that we've got problems with the implementation of access to information laws. Now, when it comes to disinformation and concerns about disinformation, one of the things that we try to argue to governments from a right to information perspective is that it's absolutely essential to ensure that we have sufficient information of sufficient quality in order to be able to counter the disinformation. And we see significant problems with that. We've had a lot of resistance at the level of the European Union, for example, to release basic information about the travel expenses of commissioners, which we did win access to, but then there's still resistance to release the travel expenses and other expenses of members of the European Parliament. Now, if governments are going to refuse to release basic information about public spending of public funds, which clearly should be in the public domain, that is just handing a beautiful opportunity to people who are, to populists, to people who want to make use of disinformation, because if you don't have real information, how can you counter the disinformation? And that's a huge problem. So the message to governments is we need more transparency rapidly in order to be able to deal with this problem of fake news. Don't go for the route of censorship. Go for the route of ensuring that the real information gets into the public domain. I would say also a note there that we need more open science. We need less walls around information that we can use in order to counter the fake news. So that's a very important message. Now, when it comes to privacy, which is the third thing that was in your question, we still have a huge problem with privacy. We still have governments refusing to release information, and we saw it this week with the expenses of the parliamentarians, the members of the European Parliament, where the argument being used is that this somehow pertains to the privacy of these individuals. If we are still having to make arguments about what people who are elected to serve a public function are doing with public funds, if we still have to make the argument that that's not privacy or that there's an overriding public interest, then we've got a problem. And we've had this very bad court ruling from the European Court of Justice this week, but I'd like to put a spin on that and say, well, actually, let's take it as an opportunity. Let's take it as an opportunity to say something's wrong with the way our laws are constructed, and we need to have a proper debate around that in order to ensure that information which should be in the public domain gets into the public domain, whilst at the same time, obviously, ensuring that the privacy of private individuals is properly protected. So privacy is something that should be protected, but at the same time, when it comes to the activity of public officials, we have to have transparency. And using privacy as a shield to hide possible, I don't know if there's corruption, but possible corruption or wrongdoing or misspending is unacceptable. So that's one of the challenges we've got going forward.